Welcome to Veritus Group's webinar, 3 Steps to Triple Your Mid-Level Donors Giving. I'm Lori Minton, Director of Operations here at Veritus, and I'll be working behind the scenes to help you as Jeff and Kara present today. Before I introduce them, though, I want to make sure you know how to use our webinar system. Because of the number of participants we have today, we won't be able to take your questions out loud, so please type them into the question box. We'd love to take your questions after Jeff and Kara have done part of their presentation, so please go ahead and type these questions in as you think of them. At the end of the presentation, we'll go ahead and get to as many of those questions as we can. My team and I will also be answering quick questions behind the scenes that we can help you with. And just so you know, we'll be sending you a link to the recording of this webinar later this afternoon. We'll also have a copy of the slides available to download with that recording, so be sure to check that out. So let's begin the webinar. Welcome to Veritus Group's webinar, 3 Steps to Triple Your Mid-Level Donors Giving. Today, we'll be hearing from Jeff Schreifels, Principal of Veritus Group, and Kara Ansotegui, our Director of Client Services. Jeff and Kara are experts in mid-level fundraising and have developed many of the tools and strategies that we use every day in our work with clients. Welcome, Jeff and Kara.
Thanks,
hey,
Lori.
Good to see you, Lori. Kara, this is going to be fun. I always love doing webinars with you.
Same.
This is me, Jeff Schreifels. I'm principal at Veritus, and I'm loving that we're moving into fall. I've had enough of summer. The heat has been too much. I live in the Philadelphia area, and the heat and humidity. I mean, the other day there was like water on all the windows just because it was so cold in here and so humid. I can't stand that. But anyway, so that's a little bit about me. Kara?
Every time I travel with Jeff, he complains about the heat if it's any place that's warmer than Philadelphia. I'm Kara Ansotegui. As Lori mentioned, I'm Director of Client Services, huge fan of mid-level. I've been with Veritus for about 2.5 years, but worked with Veritus on a mid-level program before that. So it's been about a 5-year journey, and this is really one of my very favorite subjects. So I'm happy to be here today.
So, all right. Oh, I shouldn't have my phone on. That's like the number one bad thing to do. Anyway, now, before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are at Veritus. Some of you on the call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, our vision is to help nonprofits create a culture and fundraising approach that creates transformational relationships with the donors. And this dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and plan giving programs. We believe that your organization, to actually achieve your mission, you need to shift how you see your donors and their role in your organization. But you also need to create partnerships internally and with your community. We've worked hard to ground our approach in objective fact, not just our personal opinion. And we formed our recommendations through insight from analysis of millions of donor records and our work with thousands of fundraisers and leaders. And we've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years that have helped us learn and develop our strategy and approach.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the exciting things of mid-level in our approach, Jeff. A few months ago, our team got to join in on a celebration alongside one of our clients. So one of the mid-level officers that we work with had been following our relational approach really to a T. They'd been staying on top of their donor outreach, following up with impact reports, everything that we, say that they should be doing. And it was really impressive. One day, our coach got a static call from a fundraiser, and one of the donors that this fundraiser had been building a relationship with sent in a surprise gift. So previously, just for some context, the donor had been giving about $5,000 each year. But after hearing about the impact of the gift, learning more about the programs they care about, and really having that impact shared continuously, the donor decided to increase their gift to $15,000. And it is awesome because I feel like this story is one of many that we hear about all the time from our mid-level officers and all types of nonprofits that are really following the Veritus way of mid-level.
Yeah.
So our promise is, with this story in mind, if you follow our advice today, you're going to gain the tools and strategy that can help you create those meaningful relationships with your donors that will ultimately lead to that increased giving across your mid-level pool. We've had, as Jeff shared, the pleasure of working with thousands of nonprofit fundraisers and leaders, and we know how mid-level programs can really transform your work with donors. We've calculated results for some of our clients, and before starting mid-level, they typically had a value attrition of about 45%. After a year, their average revenue had increased by 15%. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, that really, when you look at the numbers, can be a very significant increase. It's a major swing really from losing revenue to increasing revenue, and ultimately just one measure of the work that we do in mid-level.
That's right. So when we work with our clients and train participants in our online academy, we use a data-proven, disciplined system and structure for effectively managing your donors. We'll talk through these steps here in a moment, but here's a quick overview of this process. So in mid-level, we start with creating a caseload of donors that meet a certain criteria and tiering them. This criteria differs by organization, and what your level of your mid-level program starts at might be different than somebody else's. But once the caseload is identified, donors should be tiered into A, B, and C. Then you move into the introductory series before transitioning them into strategic monthly touchpoints. And these touchpoints are customized by tier. So your most personal communication is going to tier A. And you're also doing regular analysis, evaluation, and potentially moving donors to major gifts or back to the direct response program. But I want to say one more thing about mid-level and why we love mid-level, because mid-level allows everyone in the development team to come together. You need the major gift team and the direct response team to come together when you're creating a mid-level program. And I would say, besides the revenue increase and the number of donors moving into major gifts, the other main reason why mid-level is so important is because probably for the first time, you're going to bring all of your team together and around the same table and really understanding who each other is, what you're trying to accomplish together, because mid-level forces the direct response discipline and the major gift and plan giving disciplines to sit at the table with you. So we've done this so many times, and we've seen the impact that it makes on organizations when they start a strong mid-level program, because for the first time, they bring all those people together.
Yeah, Jeff, I think it really breaks down those silos, or it can if it's managed correctly.
Absolutely. So let's first go back to the start of that structure, which is building the caseload. When we work with organizations, this is how we approach building a mid-level caseload, so the fundraiser is working with the best donors. First, as we've already mentioned, you get a pool of donors that meet a pre-established criteria. Then from that pool, you pull a group until you reach your target caseload size. And typically in mid-level, we recommend caseloads of 500 to 700 donors. Although we would always start on the lower side of that when you're just starting out. So don't start with 700. So as you prepare to tier the caseload, you'll be looking at revenue, available contact information, and other key information about the donor to help you tier A through C. The first step we want to discuss here is the key in your approach to mid-levels is that tiering the caseload. And this is exactly what the fundraiser that Kara just told you about did before they began communicating with their donors.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think it would be good to take a moment and discuss, that tiering section a little bit further, because it's such a critical part of a successful mid-level program. As you shared, we approach tiering a little bit differently in mid-level than we would maybe in major gifts. In mid-level, tiering is really going to be driven by revenue. And we typically look at revenue for current and prior fiscal years when we determine tiering and where those donors sit. The tiers are ultimately going to be designed to help you focus your energy and your time so you have the highest impact. In higher tiers, you're doing the most personalization, and that's where you're really going to spend the most of your time. Again, similar to major gifts and tiering. An important note in all of this is that our tiers are fluid. So as you learn more about your donor, you can and you really should be moving them if information indicates that they should be in a different tier. So if a donor is a tier C and they make a big gift, bump them up to a tier A so you can really start personalizing that outreach that you send to them. So here's a visual of what it means by tiering your caseload. And you're going to see here, tier A has the smallest donor count, but that's because we're really focusing on that highly personalized and strategic communication and moves. In tier A, your focus is really learning more about that donor's passions and interests, retaining that donor, lifting their giving, and then ultimately, we want to move those donors into major gifts. When we look at tier B, we are going to be deciding who should be, did we move forward? Yeah, we can see here. Next one, sorry. When we think about tier B, a large part of the focus is going to be identifying donors who can move into tier A. So here we're going to keep a close eye on interest, capacity, potential, again, what you're learning in those conversations you have with them. And then our tier C is where most of our donors are going to be, and they are going to have the least amount of personalization. So as you learn more about the donor, you can begin to adjust and consider moving that donor to B or A. And I have seen, I will say more times than one, a donor move from a C to an A just by getting added to a portfolio and start getting outreach. It can be really remarkable. So the introduction series is a really key step in the process of engaging with donors in mid-level. It helps you learn if the donor does or does not want to engage. We learn communication preferences. We identify incorrect contact information sometimes, and hopefully we begin to get more information about those passions and interests. What really is driving them to give to the organization? I think what's really important here is that we have to keep in mind that this happens over a long period of time. The introduction series usually takes about 3 months to complete, but it really takes 6 to 7 months to connect with a third of your caseload. So along the way, and you see that in here, we're going to be mixing in outreach. We're going to use mail, phone calls, email. Some people use text and it works quite well. Small group video meetings, other options that are really available to engage with those donors and begin to build those relationships. You probably see that many of these are similar to the kinds of communications we use in major gifts as well. So when you're thinking about what to do with mid-level, the major gifts program can really offer some great resources and ideas. Yeah. So let's set some expectations because I think this is important. When you have a caseload of 600, it can be easy to be disappointed or frustrated when it feels like you're not hearing from people. But when you think about it, 1 in 3 are going to say yes, right, to having that relationship with us. And we really are looking at a one-to-some communication in mid-level. So we want to set expectations on goals. So before we do that, let me just explain one-to-some. Mass mail, direct response is one-to-many. Major gifts is one-to-one. So one-to-some is really looking at how do we make donors feel like it's one-to-one, but we find efficiencies in that. So the goal here is to learn passions and interests, right? To have that two-way connection and see giving increase. As a part of that, like the mid-level officer we talked about earlier, you're also going to learn about the donor in order to identify which donors should move into major gifts, which ones should stay in mid-level. And I just want to remind you guys, it's a process. I remind my clients all the time, mid-level is a marathon, not a sprint. And again, I mentioned just those additional gifts you're going to get in the introduction process are going to surprise you. So Jeff already mentioned this. Caseload size is about 500 to 700, depending on the number of factors with our donors moving in and out. Caseloads are fluid. You're going to have new donors coming in. You're going to have donors moving out, and then you're going to have some that move over to major gifts. And within that, it's important to recognize that what I mentioned, the 1 in 3. So about 1 in 3 in that caseload of 500 to 700 are going to say yes to having a relationship with you. It's really important to remember that because a large part of your job in mid-level is going to be identifying those donors that want that relationship with your organization. And if they want that relationship with you and their giving thresholds or capacity are at that major gift level, then they're the perfect donor to move to major gifts. And I think the beauty of it is that the major gift officer doesn't have to spend time qualifying them because you've already done that for them. Just reiterating that point, a major part of what you need to do before moving a donor into major gifts is to actually qualify them as the mid-level officer. This is a big part of your job.
Absolutely. So the core of our philosophy is based in this idea that when you focus on the donor, you're focusing on that relationship, the money will follow. And when you're committed to learning a donor's passions and interests, you can begin to tap into a deeper, more meaningful relationship. Unfortunately, most nonprofit organizations out there have a transactional mindset where the focus is primarily on money and not the donor. This shows up in the attitude from leadership, metrics, and throughout the organization. Here are just a few of the most common examples we see from transactional fundraising practices. One is where you have systems that don't support the donor journey. This can be something like having slow gift processing that delays your ability to thank the donor for their gift, or sticky internal processes that make the transition of a donor from direct mail to mid-level to major gifts challenging and clunky. Another example is you primarily communicate with donors about giving. This means your communication strategy is out of balance, or you may be relying exclusively on direct response. Let me just remind you, though, we love partnering with direct response. We just don't want you to rely fully on it. Rather than incorporating meaningful touch points that report back on impact, tell a changed life story, share the need, the goal here is truly to connect the donor to your mission. And you aren't incorporating the donor's communication preferences and interests in your communication strategy. And this might look like a mandate that every donor gets a particular marketing report, even if it doesn't relate to their interests. Now, I want to come back to my earlier point about pursuing money at the cost of the long-term relationship. This approach can have dramatic impact on your donors and ultimately how much revenue you can raise for your mission. Donors don't like to be treated like ATMs. They're tired of not feeling valued and appreciated. And this kind of thinking has probably cost your organization thousands or even millions of dollars. So continuing to approach fundraising in this way is detrimental. In a transactional approach, you may get some large gifts, but the donor won't feel honored or seen as a partner. So you'll struggle to build a long-term relationship. We had one client who shared a story of a donor who gave $12 million and then did not hear anything for 5 years from anyone. And after the MGO contacted him, he said, I felt forgotten and unappreciated, and no one shared how the students did or received my scholarship funds. So can you imagine not stewarding a $12 million donor?
That's crazy.
And it's not just large gifts that need proper stewarding. To some of your donors, $1,000 or $5,000 gifts feels just as significant as a $12 million gift. And at the end of the day, this results in minimal or stagnant growth because you aren't properly nurturing your donor relationship. So what does it look like when you do move into a more relationship-focused strategy or you're treating your donors like partners? Well, first, you honor the donor's inclination, communication preferences, and passions and interests throughout your strategy and communication with the donor. You regularly report back on the impact of the donor's giving, and you regularly take the opportunity to celebrate the donor. You see the donor as part of the greater community that is coming together to achieve your mission. You see them as a partner in this work. And internally, when you're relationship focused, you don't have unhealthy competition or silos. Everyone is working together to further the mission and doing it as part of the community.
Yeah, Jeff, that's one of the most important parts is breaking down the silos, right? Like we just talked about, really putting the donor at the heart of the work. So let's talk about knowing the donor story. We've got you thinking from a relationship-focused mindset. So let's talk about how you can begin to authentically learn your donor's passions and interests. The real goal here is really to know the donor story, and curiosity is key, but we want you to be tactful with that curiosity. It should be genuine, and you should be using permission-based asking. really to ask the donor if they're comfortable sharing their story. It feels a lot better to be asked something like this. I know you've given to our summer food program every year for the last 5 years. Would you mind if I ask some questions to learn more about your passion for that program? So that feels better than something like, why do you support our summer food program? So it's really thinking about how you ask those questions and doing that using permission-based asking in a really thoughtful way. I think it's also really important to remember that every donor's passion and interest also has a driver behind it. So as you build trust and continue to learn more about the donor, you want to better understand that driver, because that's ultimately the key to unlocking how you and the donor partner together to support their interests. So here you see some different examples of a driver versus a passion and interest. And you may have a donor who's really passionate about education, but the driver is that they were the first person in their family to attend college. It's the heart piece, right? It's the most powerful part of your relationship with the donor, is understanding the why behind that gift. So here's an overview of some touch points that we think about when we think about building those relationships, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about communication plans as well. And we look at a number of different ways of reaching our donors and engaging with our donors in meaningful ways. So as you learn your donors' passions and interests, you're going to be looking for ways to tailor those touch points, and you want them to connect meaningfully with your donors. You want them to be inspired by what they're reading and receiving from you. So you don't want to just send a bunch of touch points like an in-house mail vendor, but you want to be sending out information that's relevant and of value. And that's how you get the donor to engage and build trust. So let's talk about what that plan can look like. The communication plan right here on your screen is a really great way to manage that communication you're going to have with your mid-level donors in a manner that prepares the donor for the kind of relationship they're really going to have ultimately with a major gift officer, if we can move them to that level. So you can see here how we've taken the tiers, and those are the ones we talked about earlier, A through C, and we shift those to our plan according to tier. So for example, you can see under the phone touchpoint protocol that the protocol for calling starts with the most attempts, right? Usually about 3 for tier A, and then it descends. So this is to keep the focus on your top tier donors who are more likely to move to major gifts while continuing to manage and engage with the rest of your caseload. Again, 1 to some that we talked about. It's a very similar approach to what we recommend with major gifts caseloads as well. And you're going to want to mix different contact methods and types of interaction and engagement so that you're actively cultivating and stewarding your donors, showing them that the impact of their gifts is great, and learning more about those interests and putting opportunities to give in front of them. This really was a critical part of how the mid-level officer, whose story I shared earlier, was moved from 5 to 15,000. The donor mid-level officer was attentive to their interests, shared impact of what they'd been giving, and then provided relevant and valuable content.
Yeah, I mean, another key part to that story was that the fundraiser started reporting back to that donor. And it's shocking how little reporting back is often done to our donors, especially in mid-level. But really, reporting back is one of the most important and impactful things you can do to better retain your donors and increase their giving.
Yeah, Jeff, I think it's easy to think that only major donors need to be reported back to or told they're making a difference, because that's traditionally what a lot of organizations have done. But really, we need to do that for all donors. All donors need to know they're making an impact. And I think too often donors fall into this red bubble area here where they give a gift and then they're never told that their gift did anything. So they move on, right? They give their gift somewhere else. And I think this is especially true of donors in the mid-level giving range, because organizations often treat them the same as they would a $10 donor. So if you wonder what I mean by that, I just mean that they don't get reported back to, and ultimately those donors aren't given opportunities as mid-level donors to give and be a bigger part of the organization and a bigger part of the solution. So instead of mid-level program, we want to follow the blue bubbles and tell donors personally about their impact, the difference they're making, and then we want them to help again. We want to connect donors with donors and learn more about those passions and interests so that we can grow our relationship with them. And I can tell you from experience, just that that process of reporting back is going to show some amazing increases in giving. I can't tell you how often we see donors go from 1,000 to suddenly 5 or 10, or in the case today, we talked about 15, just because they're getting that personal impact. And I think that's really incredible to think about.
It is.
So one of the touch points on the chart I shared earlier was you made a difference. We call that a YMAD, which really has a number of different options under it. And one is impact reporting. So again, when you create impact reports, we want to look at sharing how a gift was used and the status of that project. It's going to reaffirm that the donors made a difference and that their gift is getting put to good use. So in a moment, I'm going to share some examples of formal impact reports, but I just want to reinforce to you that impact reports don't have to be formal. You can report in a variety of ways that don't require fancy marketing materials. A quick text update from a program meeting, a photo of a recipient, those can be really impactful. I've even had shaky handheld iPhone videos from out of the country sent to donors that have been incredibly meaningful and impactful. Okay, so let's just look at a couple of those formal impact reports. This is a great example from the American Cancer Society. There's a lot I really appreciate about this YMAD. You know, it's easy to see some of their key focus areas: research, support, education, advocacy. I also appreciate that they share real impact numbers. They're helping you see here the difference in a big picture, the ways your support is making a difference for them. Okay, let's look at the next example. This is one of my favorite YMADs. It's from a client I worked with, and I really love the piece for many reasons, not just because I worked on it. But first, they shared an overview of the donor's annual gift amount. Then they also shared cumulative giving so that the donor could really see the full difference they were making for this organization. You know, I also love that they highlighted certain areas of the work they were doing and then shared a story to showcase how that work was happening, in this case, in a specific continent. And then one of the last things I loved is they included a QR code so that you could watch a video about the impact. I mean, it's a really comprehensive piece. Awesome. It is really, yeah. And they left a spot on the bottom, so they all hand wrote their notes on them. It was just a wonderful YMAD all around.
Awesome.
Okay, we're going to shift for a second and talk about equivalency language. It's a valuable tool in mid-level for reporting back when we're talking to our donors about the difference they're making. So it really, what it does is it takes your program costs and then it creates a ratio that allows you to illustrate your impact. For example, a summer reading program that serves 50 students each month for 3 months. Let's say the program costs $300,000. You can do some math and determine that $100,000 is the equivalent of serving 50 students for 1 month. So you can take it further to say $2,000 is the equivalent of serving 1 student for 1 month of the summer reading program. And then you share that information with your donors so that they can see the impact of their support, right? It's such an important tool to better identify donors' passions and interests and how they're really making a difference in work. Let's look at a couple examples. I think what's great about this example is it's saying, hey, here's our public media station. Here's what it costs to keep us running for a week. And then the donor gets to see themselves in what the need is and how they're helping to solve that need. Pretty simple, in my opinion, and I loved it. This one is pretty jarring, don't you think, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for a month's work in the Philippines, $1,500, right? Talk about being able to see the difference you're making in someone's life. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
All
right. So
go ahead.
You have another one?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I will say, you know, with the clients we work with, we have found when our mid-level officers are using that equivalency language in their welcomes and in their follow-ups, they're having a much higher rate of response and return from their donors, because I think they really are starting to see themselves in that work.
Well, they can see tangible things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Donors love that.
Yeah.
So good stuff. All right. So let me ask, if we had a way to teach you how to develop a mid-level program that would move more of your donors into transformational giving with your organization, would you be interested in that? And I can see a number of you raising your hands. Yes. All right. Well, we have 2 sessions for our best-selling certification course in mid-level fundraising starting on September 18th or October 30th. And this course provides a comprehensive training on the system and structure that we're talking about, where you can implement to create and grow a successful mid-level program by establishing critical data systems, integrating the fundamentals for effectively and efficiently managing the mid-level caseloads, including evaluation and reporting, and that smooth transition of donors to major gifts. Now, here's a note from a Veritus Group alumna about how this course impacted her organization's mid-level program. And what Beth is basically saying is that this course gave her everything she needed to create a successful mid-level program, because the process and structure we teach helps you identify those donors' passions and interests. If you're looking to grow or start a mid-level program and take your work with donors to the next level, this really is a course you don't want to miss. And if you want to get the $200 off, either for the upcoming course, which starts September 18th or October 30th, go to veritusgroup.com/courses and select certification courses in mid-level fundraising and use coupon code OG23ML200 on the registration page. All right, so I think this is a great time now, Lori, for questions.
Great. Thank you, Jeff and Kara, for this great information. We do have a few questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with those. We've got one from Brian. He says, should mid-level donor workers customize or limit regular marketing communication outreach, such as mass emails and direct mailings, or should they allow all those touches on top of the planned strategic touches?
Can I take this one?
Yeah.
This is an exciting one for me. So it's a yes and. You never want to take your donor out of their current mail stream. That's what they've been responding to. That's what's been working. Unless a donor asks you to, you keep them there. In addition to that, you want to have an overlay, which is your mid-level program. So that's the and to that is, and you want to work with your direct response team to perhaps send a couple of pieces a year that are coming from direct response that you can tag onto. So let me give you two examples. It might be that your direct response program is sending out a calendar that is really popular. So that's part of your touch point plan, and that you call the donors the month beforehand and say, hey, Jim, I just want to let you know, we have a calendar coming out. I know it's one of your favorite pieces. Be on the lookout for it. How are things? How can I serve you? Okay, so that's one option where you can partner. Another one is sometimes we get those pieces mailed to the mid-level program themselves. It's an impact report. Why reinvent the wheel? Segment those donors out, have that mailed to your mid-level program, have them put a sticky note with a letter on and a handwritten note on top for your A's and B's, maybe something merged for your C's, and get that out the door. So yes, direct response continues. Yes, mid-levels and overlay. And at least twice a year, you should really look at partnering with your direct response program for efficiencies and on materials that are high performing.
Great. Thank you, Kara, for that. We're going to go ahead and move on to a question from Jennifer. Jennifer struggles with where to put prospects that are giving around $1,200 annually. Are they mid-level, or should they be put on the caseload for an MGO? Or do they start on a mid-level program and then if they're giving increases, then they move up? Their particular organization classifies a donation as a major gift at the $5,000 level.
Go ahead, Kara.
It depends on what they classify mid-level as.
Yeah.
Does it say, Lori?
It did not say.
Okay.
Well, let's just say it's $1,000 to $4,999 in this case.
And so I would consider a prospect someone not giving. So it sounds like it's someone who's giving at the $1,200 level. I would absolutely put them in a mid-level caseload if you have the space and you have the resources to do so, right? So really, when we look at data and caseloads, we look at the top 600 right below major gifts for the first person, and then we go on from there. So if you can have a caseload, you have enough people to put them on a caseload, that group should absolutely be on that caseload because they have a lot of potential to move up to mid-level, to major gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Eileen would like to know, for mid-level donors at their organization, If they qualify and move to major gifts, they do not move away from the mid-level officers. What is your position on a mid-level file that has a mix of major gifts and mid-level?
Well, I want to know why they stay with the mid-level. And usually I've heard of this, and there's some kind of fear happening. They fear that if they move the donor to major gifts, somehow they'll lose them, or that so the donor will be upset, and so they keep these donors. So what you're doing then is you're essentially creating a major gift caseload for your mid-level officer, who then is, not now focused on developing those relationships to help move them out. They're keeping them, and that could be a problem. It really depends on how you set up the strategy from moving a mid-level to major gifts. And with the clients that we work with, we have a great way of doing that honors the donor, honors everyone involved, passes that off. And really the donor is served better because they now have someone who can spend much more time developing the long-term relationship with them. So I'd really urge you, if you can, to move those donors into a place where they can get more attention, because otherwise you'd end up building a major gift caseload for your mid-level donor, and you kind of take away the idea of what mid-level is all about.
I have one client that just did an introduction from mid-level to major gifts using Grativid. And the donor sent back the kindest note about how wonderful it was and how much he appreciated the introduction to the new major gift officer and how much he looks forward to meeting her in person, because they did it in such a nice and thoughtful way that made him really the center of the move.
So what you're saying is, so some people might not know what Grativid is. They sent a video, right?
Yeah.
And from the video email, they were able to do that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you both for that one. We have a question from Mitzi. Could you identify some best practices to bring leadership on board with transformational fundraising?
I'm going to let Jeff take this one.
Best practices. Well, what we've done is when we go in and work with an organization, part of our training initially is to get everyone around the table, including the executive leadership, board members, anyone in that organization that can spare the time to come around the table and hear what the philosophy is around all this transactional to transformational stuff is all about, so that everyone in the organization can develop a culture of philanthropy together. That's the key. And if your leadership is not on board, sponsoring those kind of discussions is probably the best way I can determine to get them around the table and have everyone listening at the same time what we're trying to accomplish in development. So while leadership should be leading those discussions, many times it's development team starting to lead those discussions, inviting executive leadership and board into those discussions so that they understand where you're trying to go philosophically and understand why does it take so much time to build relationships, and why isn't this about bringing in money overnight? And so that's what we have found to be best practices outside of slipping blog posts under their door secretly so that they understand what you're all trying to do. But that's what we've seen, that approach works well.
Great. Thank you again. Kayla would like to know, does Veritus recommend face-to-face solicitations as is prioritized in major gifts given time constraints in a mid-level program?
In some cases, I can see that. If you're a local charity and it's easy for you to do that, there's some people in your A level, if they're open to it, for those kind of meetings. It's not the norm, but if you, again, are a local organization and it's easy for them, yes.
Yeah, we typically would say your locally, your tier A would take that priority. It's hard to meet with 600 people. So you got to prioritize who needs the face-to-face ask.
Definitely.
Perfect. Thank you. And would like to know if you could define in a nutshell what qualifying a donor means.
Okay, so I think a lot of confusion happens with the word qualifying between major and mid-level. So I'm going to talk about both so I can be really clear about this. In major gifts, we say you have to be qualified to be on a caseload, which means we make outreach to you in that introduction series and you respond by email, text, phone. You show that you want to have a two-way connection with us. So that's what it means to have a qualified donor on major gifts.
You meaning the donor. You meaning the donor responds back to you.
Correct. The donor responds back. Thank you. So mid-level, you're considered qualified based on giving parameters that put you in a mid-level portfolio. So you come to mid-level as qualified. I tell my clients this: you have to opt in to major gifts and you have to opt out of mid-level, right? You have to tell us you don't want to be in mid-level. Mm-hmm. The reason I think it gets a little confusing is we say when you move them to major gifts, you want to move qualified donors. That just means that you want to move any of your mid-level donors that you've had a two-way relationship with to major gifts, because that takes that process out for them. They then get a qualified donor.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. We have another question from John. I've read a great deal about qualifying major donors. Is there a process you recommend for qualifying the mid-level donors versus the major donors?
I'm hoping we just answered that.
Well, you would just, that introduction series, it's not a qualifying series, but it's a series of trying to get to know who your donors are and start to develop those passions and interests, and letting them know that the relationship with the organization is changing, because prior to you creating a mid-level program, they're just getting direct response stuff. They're getting mail, they're getting emails, that kind of thing. And for the first time, you're introducing a human being into the relationship from your organization. And so that's why that introductory series is so important, because you're helping the donor change their mindset now about the relationship with your organization. So as Kara said, you're not trying to qualify a mid-level person. And over time, and your A-level specifically in mid-level, you are in a sense qualifying that donor if they make that qualifying gift, because now you know them, you've had some connection with them, you know what kind of person they are, that they are ready to be in major gifts. So you are putting a qualified person into major gifts, and that major gift officer no longer has to qualify them themselves, because in mid-level, you've already done it.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Another question we have is, I don't have funds for a full-time mid-level officer. Where can I start?
Well, do you have funds for a half-time or
that's what I was going to say.
I mean, so if we said a full-time caseload is 600, a half-time could be 300, or a quarter time is what, 200, or 150. However much time you have, that really would dictate how many donors you can successfully cultivate and steward. And so figure out what can you devote to it, and then that will determine how many donors could be in that portfolio. And then you would also do the same things that we had talked about, tiering, all of those things, the communication plans, based on a less number of donors. So if it's 600 for full-time, it'd be 300 for half-time, and down and further down. But the key is that if you're going to devote, let's say, half your time to mid-level, you have to be very disciplined to make sure that you actually do half of your time, because in many cases, it's really hard to block off that time and be very diligent and disciplined about it. But it's very important that you do if you really are serious about starting a mid-level program.
Jeff, I would just also add that if you have a lot of mid-level donors and you only have time for a half-time staff, think about other efficiencies to steward those donors, right? There's different programs that I know Addressable is one of them, where you can do handwritten notes from the mid-level officer to get more personalized touch points out there. So think about what other efficiencies you have that can still touch those donors and deliver impact.
Good.
Great. We have a question from Miranda. She says, what are the top 3 things that she should look to use to dictate when a donor is in tier A versus a lower tier? Is it revenue, ability to communicate, affinity? What would you think the top 3 would be?
So for me, I'm always going to go this fiscal year, revenue this fiscal year, and build my threshold.
Yeah.
Excuse me, cumulative.
Recency and amount.
Yep. And then last year, I look at that as well. If there's ties and things like that, sometimes we use wealth ratings because I know we get that question a lot, but we really look at those, the giving, recency, and amount, like Jeff said, the last 2 years. And then as we learn more about our donors and our passions and our interests, we may bump a donor that's a tier C up to an A because we know of their capacity and their potential. So we always start with giving, and then that can shift as we get to know our donors based on the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. I would not create a mid-level portfolio based on potential. No. You don't want to do that. No. You do it on their actual giving. Start there. And as Kara says, as you get to know them, you may move them up and down those tier levels as you find out more about them. But I would never create a portfolio based on a potential or, oh, they had a high wealth rating or they had a high modeling score. You put them in mid-level, maybe on tier C, but you wouldn't use that as the sole determining factor.
Great, thank you. Tricia would like to know, where do monthly donors fit in?
Well, Tricia, it depends on how much they're giving. If a monthly donor is giving in the mid-level range, when you look at your cumulative threshold for the year, they absolutely should go in mid-level. Those are some of your most valuable donors. You have their credit cards, you're charging them every month. You want to keep them happy. You want to deliver impact. I have genuinely seen donors who are in mid-level increase their monthly donation from anywhere to $500 to $1,000 a month just by getting that touch point and that outreach from the MLO. So just because they're a sustainer or a monthly donor, don't exclude them. If they meet the threshold, put them in mid-level.
Yep. They're still sustainers, but they're also in mid-level. I think that's the thing that trips up a lot of nonprofits, is what they've done over time is taken a strategy like membership or sustainer or events, and they create a department out of it. And so for like sustainers, if you have a ton of sustainers, I can see where you build a department, people who specialize just in these sustainer donors. And so then the idea of moving them in mid-level and sustainer like blows up people's minds, because they think, oh, well, we got to keep them in either sustainer or we got to move into mid-level. And if we're going to move into mid-level, I'm going to lose a lot of revenue for my department. If you are in that situation, please rethink that strategy, because what you're doing is creating a clog in the donor pipeline, that donor journey from acquisition to major and plan giving. If you have departments set up so that it makes it so difficult for them to move into mid-level because your KPIs, the people you've got hired, everything is surrounding a strategy that's now turned into a department, you're hurting donors and their ability to give more, because you've now got this department versus, gosh, what can we do to make it as easy as possible for a donor to come in and move through that journey up to major gifts?
Well, and Jeff, I also think we're not putting the donor at the heart of that conversation.
Right.
The heart of that conversation then becomes our department and where our money lives. The heart of the conversation doesn't become the donor and what brings them joy and why they give to your organization. Because when we chase that relationship, that's when their revenue is going to grow.
That's right. And unfortunately, so many organizations have, just over time, inertia. I'm not blaming any individuals or anything for why they've taken a strategy and turned it into a department, but we just do this. We create this stuff and this infrastructure and then KPIs. And so I understand why direct response doesn't want to give up a donor to mid-level, because they're going to lose revenue because their KPIs are associated with the revenue in their department. But you can see how that actually hurts the donor.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen where I'm not giving up my donor. We've seen like events, where events like, you can't have my event donor. You're like, hold on. They aren't event donors. They're the organization's donors. And what we're trying to do is develop strategies and tactics to help move them up so that we can create relationships with those donors. So hopefully, when you look at your organization, is there anything that's causing a barrier to move the donor up? So rethink it. Zero base your whole development team to look at how easy is it to move up a donor from acquisition, that $10 or $25 or $50 first gift, to becoming a planned gift donor. And that's how you should be looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And mid-level is so beautiful because for many organizations, for the first time, with bringing a mid-level program, you're thinking about this, that donor journey. Because when we look at data, Kara, and you've seen it so many times as well, there's that clog that happens in that mid-level area where you see a bunch of donors giving at, in this case, maybe $1,000 to $4,999. And then all of a sudden, a massive drop off of donors in the next level.
Yep. Happens regularly. Yep.
Thank you both. So we're getting a lot of questions around whether donors in the mid-level caseload should receive only communications from that mid-level officer or still be part of the direct response program.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear here. This is on top of what you're already sending in your regular communications. So yes, you send them whatever it is they're currently getting. What we're saying is the mid-level thing is an overlay on top of that. And what's beautiful is that that's why you need to sit down with direct response to see what is their plan for the year, so that you can plug in your different touch points and your personalization of current direct response pieces and make sure it's coordinated correctly. So we don't want to take away, we want to add to this that more personal touch that they're getting from a human being.
I think there's this negative stigma there can be in a lot of organizations about direct response. Let's not forget what the bread and butter of what has brought 90% of those donors into your organization is, and that's direct response. They're responding for a reason. They're giving for a reason. A lot of mid-level programs are built on direct response donors. Don't take them out of the way that they're giving. That is how they're comfortable giving. That might be how they continue to be comfortable giving. But now serve as their representative for the organization to deliver impact and to build a relationship. And if they want to come out of direct mail to an extent, they will tell you in your relationship. Don't make any assumptions on their behalf.
That's right.
You tell we feel pretty passionate about that.
I think that's pretty clear. Yeah.
I think that answered several questions.
Well, if you do, I guarantee you, if you take them out, you will lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. We see it. We've seen it. So don't do that.
Leave them in. All right. Melinda would like to know, she said, I myself get so many surveys, I can't respond to all of them. How do I not annoy donors with surveys?
Well, you make
First
it about
of all, you're not the
3 minutes.
donor. That's the number one thing. If you're annoyed, that doesn't matter because you're in the business. You are. And you can't look at it like, if I'm annoyed, they're annoyed. You just can't, because donors think differently than how we think who are actually sending out these surveys.
I also think, Jeff, it's not a survey, it's informational questions, right? So
Yeah.
we call it a survey internally, but the reality is informational questions to help you build a relationship with your donor. So do you have 3 minutes to help me make sure I'm serving you correctly? How do you want me to communicate with you? Not the organization, but me. What information do you want? What projects and programs that we have do you want to know more about? It's about your relationship with them, and that feels good.
Yeah. And here's the thing. If you got 20 to 30% response to a survey type of thing or whatever, that's an amazing thing. That means that 70% or 80% are not responding to it. But 20% are, that's successful. That's success. That's a good thing.
All right, thank you. And just going through questions here.
I know we have about
I think
3
we have
minutes
time for
left,
one
Lori.
more good question.
One more question.
See if we
We
can
have an
fire Jeff up
anonymous.
for one more.
We have an anonymous question. How would you
Ooh.
recommend sending things to Tier C? Personalized emails don't really seem possible without a bounty.
Oh, but they do. Excel can email merge just like it can mail merge. And so you build an Excel document that has name, your intro, your body, a closing. You can differentiate it for a few of your donors if you need to, and you can email mail merge it. So that is something that is newer in the system, and it really works incredibly well. So I would recommend you look at that. I would say for mail, we do mail merge for all of our Cs for the most part with a short hand signature and maybe a short note, but just something to create that efficiency for your Cs.
All right. Thank you, Jeff and Kara, so much. And I'd like to thank everyone else for being with us today. As a reminder, you're going to receive an email later today with the recording of this webinar. You'll also get a link to download those slides. And if you'd like to register for our upcoming session of the certification course in mid-level fundraising, visit us at www.veritusgroup.com/courses. And don't forget to use that coupon code AUG23ML200 at checkout, and you'll get $200 off if you sign up by next Friday. So don't delay, do it by next Friday. And as always, we are available to assist you with any questions by email at academy@veritusgroup.com. And we hope to see you in our upcoming course. Take care, everyone.